And that is tragic news out of Mississippi. Breaking news right now where officials are investigating a fiery Marine plane crash that's believed to have killed all 16 people on board. Witnesses say that the KC-130 transport aircraft corkscrewed out of the sky last night. It slammed into a soybean field in Leflore County, about 85 miles north of Jackson. FBI and local authorities are still sifting through the debris this morning across a 5-mile radius. Joining us right now is the former Army intelligence officer Andrew Peek. And Andrew, it's always nice to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Maria.
No word yet on what caused the crash. How do you see this?
Well, look, the KC-130 is not only a volatile aircraft because it's an air refueler, it can carry a lot of fuel in the air, it's flammable, but it's also an airframe that's over 50 years old. You know, I remember back when I was working defense acquisitions in 2007, 8, 9, this was the Air Force's top priority to get replaced. These aircraft are simply too old. I suspect Congressman Chaffetz knows this as well. So the fact that these are still in service and there's no end date for when they'll be transitioned out of service, I think is concerning because of incidents like this one.
Wow, that's a big deal. Do you agree with that, Jason? I mean, when you look at something like this, we've been talking a long time about the fact that we have such old fleets in the Navy.
I mean, our hearts go out to 16 families dealing with this death. But he is absolutely right. If you look at the history of these, and I've flown in some, I'm not in the military, but as a member of Congress, I've been in many of them, and literally you got duct tape holding these things together. You see a surge in military funding, and a part of what we need to do is replenish that infrastructure. We've been pounding on them in Iraq and Afghanistan, but we haven't built up the actual military aircraft that we need, and I hope this is a wake-up call. Don't know if it's directly related to it, but these planes are very, very old.
Wow. Is there anything that you would suggest in terms of, Andrew, in terms of solution, next steps to update the fleet?
Well, it's not an immediate next step, but we've simply got to have a streamlining of the acquisitions process. You know, there's such a tension between the many different loopholes that the Pentagon has to jump through to get a new aircraft and the kind of emergency war-based supplies that commanders on the ground in places like Iraq and Afghanistan have been able to get their hands of. There's nothing in the middle. We have two programs, one for emergency combat requirements and one long-term, decades-long acquisition. We need something that within a reasonable time frame can get the military the aircraft it needs.
You talk about streamlining the process. Do you see any evidence that that's happening? The president came in and very early started pushing on some of the big contractors to lower prices on specific programs. But is he doing anything to make this more systematic that goes out through the entire acquisition process?
Absolutely not. And frankly, I don't think the White House is going to take this up as a priority. It's simply too much of a bureaucratic behemoth. I will say, I think if anyone at the Defense Department can do it, it's Jim Mattis, who has a long career in the Marines and is a warfighter and has a priority for getting items out into the field.
Let me ask Andrew, we've got another breaking story this morning. I want to get your take on federal authorities are investigating an explosion at an Oklahoma Air Force recruiting center. This is in the town of Bixby near Tulsa. The blast blew the doors off the building. Officers are saying no one was hurt, but the FBI is investigating it as a possible act of domestic terrorism. Your reaction?
Yeah, I think recruiting station duty is one of the most frightening things you can do stateside in the military. You know, you are out there by yourself in uniform, often in communities that don't have much of a military presence. You are a target bar none. Up until very recently, as a service member, you weren't allowed to carry a firearm. Now it's at commander's discretion. So you are walking around as a target in places that don't see a lot of military. I can't believe up to this point we haven't had more of these attacks.
Well, one of the president's commitments has been taking care of the military, whether he's talked a lot about taking care of vets, but we're seeing these kinds of incidents. We're seeing what the airplane going down. There's other stories that we've been talking about how oxygen systems aren't working on, I think it was the F-18 or one of those. What can we do? Isn't there something that, if that is the commitment of the president and this administration, shouldn't we be seeing more?
Yeah, I think there's two elements to this. One is, look, there's definitely a lag time on restoring the military's budget that was hurt by sequestration and other cuts after the Iraq War, and by combat in Iraq, of course. I think also there is a cultural shift that this administration brings, that they are going to soldiers and other service members and saying, what do you want? What can make you happy? And these are often small things. They don't get to the level of life and death issues. But things like letting soldiers roll up their sleeves, things like, letting them carry their own firearms. It's really demoralizing to be a service member on a base and be more unprotected and have fewer rights than if you were walking around on the street. So I think both these avenues are ways to address the cultural and the financial basis of the military.
Going back to the funding mechanism here, one of the big questions is how do we actually fund this? And when we don't have budgets, when we're operating on contingency budgets, the overseas contingency budget, how is that affecting what they're able to do long term?
Yeah, I think a really tough question for Congress has to be how you combine this kind of special funding for the wars overseas, as you point out, the overseas contingency operation funding, into the Pentagon's budget. Because for over a decade, that's been considered kind of the baseline Pentagon budget, and the forces plan out their budget based on those funds. I think having a serious budget press to bring those monies into the baseline service budget is going to be incredibly helpful for that.
So are you expecting that?
No, I don't expect any movement at all on any front in any political issue in Congress.
Amen. I mean, that's one of the problems. You take the OCO funding, the overseas contingency, and that is the plus-up that they get into the military as opposed to the base budget, and the consequence is they can't do the long-term planning because our acquisition is so difficult that you can't go back and buy effectively weapon systems at an effective, cost-effective rate. That's
incredible. That's really too bad. Andrew, thank you very much. Good to see you, sir.
Thanks, Maria.
Andrew Peek joining us there.